All right, so welcome, Leslie, to our workshop. This is going to be mainly about study strategies, thinking about kind of moving into midterms. But it's Valentine's branded because it's Valentine's Day. So again, welcome. We're going to talk a lot about personalizing your learning and hopefully maximizing retention as you study. So feel free to chime in with comments, questions. You can just go ahead and unmute, or if you're more comfortable, you can use the chat also. I'll be looking at that. So we're going to first talk a little bit about learning preferences, then about active learning. Then we're going to do a little of this or that game, and then I'll cover coaching services and what we can do for you in the program that I work for, which is academic coaching. So not a long workshop, but hopefully it will be useful to you. So I'm sure you've heard of learning preferences or learning styles before. Have you? You can give me just a thumbs up if you have. Yeah, so it's a common practice to talk about this with students, and often you'll hear it in the context of an assessment of some sort. We do have a learning style assessment on our webpage, and I can drop the link in the chat in a little bit for you if you're interested in taking that. But some things to know about learning preferences is it's really geared towards just that, preferences, which is why we call it learning preferences and not like a learning styles inventory. It's going to basically describe what you gravitate towards as you study. And the key thing I want you to think about when we're taking any type of assessment in relation to how you study is not necessarily that you should be doing that and only that, but that illuminates what you gravitate towards and what you might be good at, and also what instruction you receive very well, but also what your weaknesses are. And the best thing to think about in regards to preferences is that we want to always use what we're good at or what our strengths are, but we want to amplify those weaknesses as well and build on those, because the more you're able to adapt to different styles of teaching, the better, more well-rounded of a learner you're going to be. So our traditional methods or preferences are going to be visual, kinesthetic, and auditory, as you see on the screen here at the top. That's what our assessment at the Learning Center assesses, but there are inventories that will assess, up to 12, 16 different learning styles. It just depends on how much detail you're going to drill down on. But it can, as you see here, can go anywhere from trust, copy, teach, scribble, but most of those will kind of fall within the major categories of visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. For you personally, what is your learning preference? How do you like to study? Yours is visual. Sorry, I just saw the chat. So as a visual learner, of course, you're going to want to focus on pictures, diagrams, charts. What do you do if those aren't available? Maybe you're in a class where an instructor is auditory, so they're lecturing at you and not providing a lot of visual keys or cues. What can you do in a class like that to still include your visual elements that you prefer? Any ideas? Or are we typing? Oh, if there's reading, I try to find some type of picture, a diagram, sometimes look it up. Yes, I know a lot of students who will use YouTube for that, right? So you get a visual, almost like a cartoon or an illustration of what it is you're learning. Something that you can do in your notes is create a chart or a diagram, sometimes condensing all that information down to something very simple and clean to look at that has a clear structure, helps to make things more understandable. So as a visual learner, of course, this is what you're going to gravitate towards. This is what you're going to do naturally because it makes the most sense to you. However, we still want to include those other elements. So maybe talking through the diagram or chart or explaining it as if you're teaching it to somebody else. And then of course, that would be your auditory, but of course you want to include the kinesthetic element, which is just doing things with the content. So creating the chart, describing it, drawing something out, all of those things are going to be kinesthetic in nature as well. So the goal here is that we don't think of only the passive way to be that type of learner. So I'm visual, I need to look at pictures. It should be I'm visual, so I need to create the pictures or diagrams, and I'm going to explain them as well because that's incorporating these other styles. Okay. And as you mentioned, you know, if you're reading and you need a visual on it, or you want to be a little more active, you're looking for those charts or diagrams, or maybe even now creating them yourselves. And then the final piece, which we're going to talk about in a minute as well, is that self-testing portion of learning. Testing yourself regularly as you study is a great way to see what your retention is, so how much you're holding on to from that study session. And it's a great way to evaluate and measure how much time you need to spend with the content moving forward. So I would recommend when you're studying, every 30 minutes to an hour, you want to take a pause, pull out some important concepts or important problems, put away the book or notes and see if you can explain them yourselves, draw that diagram again, solve that problem, just to see if you're able to retain information. We don't want to go hours and hours of studying without that self-check, because you're wasting a lot of time there if you're not retaining. If you self-check and you're good, you move on. If you self-check and you're still a little shaky, you maybe write some questions to follow up with the instructor about, you go to tutoring, right? You check with a peer maybe, or you go back and do some more studying, okay? We want to check that and mark our progress along the way. All right, and that leads us into this active learning, this idea of active learning. So it's really important, as I mentioned with learning preferences, the goal for us there is to use as many learning styles as possible as we're studying, which is going to allow us to be more active and engaged with the material. We want to resist that traditional passive method of studying, sitting and looking at the problem, watching the video, reading the textbook. Those are all very passive. There's no way to really practice our knowledge, and there's no way to measure retention that way. So we want to think about whatever we're doing with the content, we want to engage with it at certain points in our study. Again, like every 30 minutes to an hour, to see, you know, kind of try on the knowledge, see if we understand it well enough to explain it, see if we understand it well enough to do it on our own. Okay. And this is really at the root of the idea of active learning, is that constant practice. And if we think about, you know, things outside of academics, have you, Leslie, played a sport or an instrument in the past? Is there some kind of activity that you've done in life? Dance. So as a dancer, how do you get better? How do you prepare for performances or improve on skills within that kind of realm? Continue to practice while watching over what I've done to see what I can fix. Yeah, we practice, right? In sports, in life, anywhere in life, even with cooking, doing laundry, right? Regular tasks. We know that the first time we do it, or even the 20th time we do it, isn't going to be our best. We understand that it takes practice and regular practice. And as you pointed out, not just, you know, kind of rotely doing it over and over, but evaluating how well we did it, fine tuning, picking pieces and practicing over and over again to get better. We understand and we embrace that outside of academics. For some reason, when it comes to academics, we don't want to practice, but really that's the only way we're going to get better with our ability to understand and our ability to do well on exams is if we practice. And a lot of times that practice comes through homework or reading or discussion boards or discussion in class. So what I want you to start to think about and kind of shift your mindset around that outside studying is this is just a way for me to get better and to do my best on the exam. We don't want the first time you're all alone with the content to be the exam. We want you to have practiced regularly pulling or retrieving information from your memory system. So the test is just another day of doing that. So when we're thinking about active learning, we want to practice. Sometimes, that looks different for each person. That looks different for each subject matter, but that would require you being independent with the material that you're studying. Okay. Repetition is key to moving information into your long-term memory system. So we want to be revisiting information. A lot of students, back in week one, we studied, we did our homework, whatever, we left it behind. And now I don't even know what week we're in, 4 or 5. And we may look back at week one. If we haven't been practicing that stuff, we lost it, right? Because our brain is concerned with efficiency. It's going to get rid of what it doesn't see as relevant. So what we want to do is think about long-term information storage that requires repetition. So I always recommend to students each week at the end of your learning week, pull out a couple problems or a couple concepts that you really need to hold on to. Maybe make a flashcard or put them on a piece of paper, something so that even when you're studying week 2 material, you can go back and review week 1 important concepts. Okay, so it's that repetition. So by the time we're at week 5, we have little reviews for every other week, and we're constantly revisiting that. Okay. A great practice when we're thinking about active learning is going to be explaining a concept in your own words. And in this situation, I would highly recommend being able to explain it to a novice, somebody who hasn't studied the content before, somebody who doesn't know a lot about it. We have the misconception that in order to be proficient in a concept, we need to be able to explain it like the book. But what that does is it pushes people towards memorization and not actual learning. When you know something very well, you should be able to explain it to a child clearly, and you should be able to explain it to like a peer in your class or at work clearly, right? And so you've got to shift between those different kind of ways of communicating. When you're explaining something to a child, it requires you to really think about the concept and know what to eliminate, what's not critical to understanding the concept, and what is. And that process of being able to differentiate that actually helps measure your understanding of the concept. I'm sure I do the same thing. My daughter, who's 12, does this, where she'll say, I know it, I just can't explain it right now. If that's what you're moving towards, then most often that means that you don't know it well enough. You should be able to explain it, even just in very basic terms, and that's a great measure of your understanding. Okay. Similarly, we want to be able to show our knowledge. So again, going back to your visual elements of being able to look up a diagram or create a chart or write something out on a whiteboard. I highly recommend getting a whiteboard you can keep at home or with your learning materials so that anywhere, any day, you can pull that thing out and explain like you're a teacher. And that's going to just help engage you and be active in your study. But we always want to try to show what we know, not through spitting back textbook definitions, but through being able to talk about application, talk about relationships between concepts, and actually like illuminate concepts with our own examples sometimes. And that leads us to discussion. So being well prepared for discussion in class is a great way to try on active learning strategies, to think on your feet. It takes practice, and you're not always going to be great at that. But the better, the more you engage in discussion with peers or in your classroom or with your instructor, the better you're going to get. And that's a great way to really evaluate your own knowledge. And again, as we mentioned, practice your knowledge. So that's really, really important. As you see here on the right side of the screen, this is kind of a learning cycle for deep learning practices. And what I like about this image is it includes making mistakes. Making mistakes is a really important part of learning, and it's not comfortable, so we often don't talk about it and we avoid it to the point where maybe we don't do a set of problems because we know we might make a mistake, and we just focus on the ones we do really well. Whether we do that consciously or subconsciously, that happens a lot. So making sure that you take the time first of all, you need the time to be able to make mistakes. So practicing what you're learning in class immediately or soon after leaving class is really important to drive that into long-term memory. But that also allows you to identify weak spots and find helpers, right? Tutoring, go to office hours, look up a video, right? So incorporating mistake making into your learning cycle and understanding that that is a critical part of your learning is really, really important, but we have to make time for that. So same with getting feedback, checking in with faculty, using tutoring as early as possible. It's really critical to your success. And there's a lot of resources on campus for you in that regard. And then metacognition, which I mentioned, being able to evaluate your knowledge and know, how much you know one thing or what you need to include to explain it to somebody and what you can leave out, right? Really looking at how you understand something and what kind of your strengths and weaknesses are within your knowledge of that concept. That's all part of metacognition, thinking about the way you think. So that's a really important part of learning as well. And that's why that constant self-testing is important. So for you to figure out where you need to dedicate time. Yeah. And then the last two pieces, reprocess and collaborate, interacting with others, taking turns teaching concepts to one another. Those are really important pieces of kind of fine-tuning your knowledge, getting feedback. Again, these things kind of overlap with each other, but they're all really important parts of learning that move us beyond just doing homework problems, right? Okay, let's see. So real quick, I know we had someone else join. Hi, Alvin. We are going to do a little this or that. So you can use the chat. What I'd like you to do is tell me this or that for the most active way of studying. We're going to go bullet by bullet. So under this is reading the chapter quietly to yourself, or that. Read the chapter quietly to yourself, then talk about it with a friend. Which study strategy is more active? Yeah, that. Good job. So first of all, I want to point out here that reading a full chapter is probably unrealistic, right? Unless it's like a 2-page chapter, that's a pretty heavy lift. So I would say even maybe breaking that down into sections and then checking in with a buddy, making sure that you understand it. Or if you don't know anybody in your class, at least writing out the main idea of each section real quick so you've got a good grasp of what it is you just read. But the idea here is that you do your passive reading for a little bit and then you stop and you start to pull that information out of your brain. See if you can process that information and retrieve it from your memory. See if you can explain it in your own words. Okay. Next one, look at your notes and add charts and diagrams to help them make sense, or that. Look at your notes before a test. This, yeah. So here, a couple of points. So as we mentioned a few times already, making the notes or making the PowerPoint or the book make sense to you is really critical to your learning. So this is going to be it's going to be different for everybody. And it's going to require creativity. So thinking about, again, maybe outside of academics, when you're learning something new, how do you learn best? Is it through images? Is it through actually doing it? What works for you? Or maybe short bulleted notes? Whatever works there most likely will work in academics as well. So finding that method is really important. And then the idea of looking at your notes is critical. Just as we want to read just a little bit and then kind of review, we want to do that with our notes too. So I'd recommend every time you take notes in class within 24 hours, look at those notes, make sure they make sense to you. Think about your future self in 2 weeks. Will these notes make sense to you? And maybe jot down or put some color coding or something to highlight the key points from that day. That will make your notes a lot more useful when you use them later. Okay. All right. So last or no, I guess second to last one. So solve the problems on the homework, or that is solve a problem, then explain how you solved to a tutor, which is more active. Mhm. All right, so here, the important piece I want to point out is when you're going to tutoring, you have got to be able to not just receive information, but use your tutors as a sounding board to produce that information. So as you start to understand something, feel free, especially I'm in a tutoring center. I know you have your tutoring center in SAS Center, but let the tutor know like, okay, I understand it. So give me another problem. I'm going to explain to you how to do it. That's just trying on that other view, making sure that you understand the processes well enough to almost teach them to somebody else. It also helps the tutor understand where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are in regards to that concept. So make sure you take the time to do that. And if you're uncomfortable in tutoring, then maybe do that with somebody when you're outside of school. The goal here is just that you're trying on that different view of, rather than being the receiver of information, you're now producing it yourself. Okay. Um, Last one. So break up your study time into 1 hour blocks and include a verbal visual review before breaking, or study for 3 hours straight and then take a break. Which one is more active? This or that? Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, reading a whole chapter is probably unrealistic in one sitting. An hour might be unrealistic for you too. You may need to work in shorter sessions. Even within an hour, your focus time is going to probably be 20 to 30 minutes. I know as a grad student, when I was doing reading, the information was really dense. I went like 15 to 20 minutes and then I took a break. But before I took a break, I would go through and maybe pull out a main idea or concept, write a few notes, try to explain a concept out loud before I moved on, just to check for that understanding. So making sure that you get to know yourself as a learner and what your focus time is. That may vary from subject to subject, right? And setting aside time in your week to make sure you allow for that. Not getting to the point where you're cramming and then you have to shove all this information into your brain at the last minute. Because usually when that happens, sometimes we do well. That's why we cram, is because sometimes it works. But if we're thinking about long-term learning, especially in your college, that's not going to be an effective strategy, because what you're doing is building up your workload later through the semester or through the next year of learning. So we want to incorporate breaks, really be realistic about your focus time, and incorporate around those breaks either before or after a review of the material, and that can become that self-testing portion. Now, all of these strategies I mentioned here, you can practice with a peer coach. So I think that's our next slide, actually. Let me see. Yeah. So I work in the Learning Center in the peer coaching or academic coaching program. And so I supervise 5 peer coaches who are available in Beach Connect. You can schedule with them by going to the Beach Connect Chicklet, hitting Get Help, Academic Coaching, and then you'll see everybody's days and times. You can schedule free one-on-one appointments. You can meet with our coaches weekly. And what we can help you with is integrating some of these strategies into your regular study practice. With a lot of students, we do weekly time management. So just setting up your study schedule as it relates to your personal life and making sure you have time for everything. We can help you with kind of managing study guides, study strategies that might work for you based on your learning preferences. We can help with pretty much anything related to doing well academically that isn't directly related to course content, but your approach to that content. So like I said, time management is a big one for students: reading, note-taking, exam prep, organization, all of those things. So if you're hearing this and you're feeling like maybe you could use some help, I highly recommend you reach out and make an appointment with our peer coach. We have online and in-person appointments available, and our hours are usually, it's Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5, with some evening availability for some of our peer coaches, and then Fridays also. Additionally, on our webpage, so if you went to csulb.edu, I'll put it in the chat, /TLC, there are some tutorials, some time management resources, a lot of sheets and different templates you might want to try, just to kind of get a grasp on your study schedule and what might work for you. So feel free to check those things out too under academic coaching. And I think that's about it. Any questions or anything that I didn't cover that you would like me to at this point, or you want to bring up as it relates to studying or learning, feel free to use the chat. Or you can unmute if you want. And I'm putting my email in the chat as well. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me over email. Oh, it's 3:33. Make a wish. So I think we're about wrapped up with the content. You can always feel free. Oh, there's a few. Oh, this is from Sonia.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, there's a bunch of questions. But feel free to reach out if something pops into your head in like 3 days. You can always reach me over email, and definitely make an appointment with a coach if you don't even need to be struggling. You just might need some support, or a lot of students come and see us weekly for accountability, just staying on track, sticking to it. If you know, okay, I tend to fall off the rails around week 6, then plug us into your program, come meet with us, and we'll try to keep you, going in the right direction. So you can use us for that too.